In our study of the mother's symbol, we began with the big picture of what is a symbol. We saw that everything is a symbol. We ourselves are a symbol. And then within that context, we developed the framework of the creative impulse opening out into 4 aspects and working through 12 powers, virtues. And while there is a natural sequence in which they seem to be prioritized, one leading to the other, categorized, one found 4 of them founding, 4 developing, and 4 relating. Ultimately, they are all facets of one movement, one consciousness, taking on many aspects, appearances. And therefore, within each one of them, all the others are present. Through each one of them, all the others can be developed. This is a very important principle to appreciate, perhaps easier to study in the 4 aspects, and we can take a few examples there and appreciate how the same works even in the 12 powers. We saw how the 4 aspects work together to form a completeness. But since they are all aspects of the same one, within each, all 4 are present. So in the aspect of knowledge, for one who has a temperament which is primarily oriented to knowledge, there can be still further 4 subdivisions where through knowledge there is this aspect of the pure knowledge itself, the action of the knowledge, the articulation or organization of how the knowledge is expressed, and the perfect representation of it. And within each of these one could make further 4 splits. And you can see how all of these can make for a very rich, complex mix of the 4 playing within each other. And that's what makes for the great diversity of human types. Upon this, there is a further complexity that comes when these 4 soul powers flow out and have to act through the substance of our nature. The substance itself is of 3 types or offers 3 kinds of responses. This is described in the yogic terminology as the guna. Guna literally translates as quality. And there are 3 gunas, which together form the essence of all qualities expressed. Let me step back briefly to explore this idea, and then we will see how it relates to the larger picture. If you take a flower, and we have this color, texture, smell, taste, etc., which form the sense of the flower. The sense of the color is because the light that shines upon it is modified by the contact with the flower. Some of the light is absorbed, some of it is reflected, some of it is scattered. And the particular combination of this makes for the overall sense of the color and even the form. What in the flower makes for this particular kind of response to the light? A quality there present which modifies the quality that is light. And that leads to the modified quality. So if you start analyzing any object, you will find it is essentially a bundle of qualities upon which other qualities act and are modified by these existing qualities. Modern science is erroneously obsessed with structure. It looks at the atomic structure, molecular structure, and then says, well, because of this molecular structure, the light is modified in this way. But how? Why? It cannot explain. It somehow says the structure gives rise to quality, but the Vedic physics is different. It sees structure as secondary, quality first. All is quality of consciousness. And when light falls upon it and is modified by the qualities present, is reflected and modified in certain ways, to our mind and our sight, it looks like there is a molecular structure or an atomic structure. Structure is incidental. You get the idea? If everything is a bundle of qualities and quality of consciousness, and all consciousness is essentially one consciousness projecting a diversity of qualities, structure is a secondary appearance to us. We never really see the flower, we see only the light that bounces from it. When you touch it and feel its softness, you never really touch it. It's the molecules on the tip of your finger which respond to the pressure of qualities on that side, modifying certain processes to give you certain signals which your mind constructs as a structure. Structure is secondary, quality is first. And once you understand this, you can understand how qualities can be modified, transformed into each other. And such a huge, rich variation of qualities. The ancient yogis, analyzing them, went down to their basis and found ultimately all qualities, guna, boiled down to three. And they put it thus. When the light hits, or when your finger touches this thing, bundle of quality or this consciousness, what are the possible responses the consciousness can give to it? First response, resist. Okay? Second response, push back. Third response, harmonize. Okay? So we described how light is absorbed or reflected or scattered. It's the bundle of qualities boiling down to three essential kinds of qualities. And the mix of these three in proportion make for all the variation. There is no other. There are no other than these three responses possible. Okay? Now this principle can be recognized on all levels. You meet me as a human being, I'm a bureaucrat in a government, let's say. I can offer you tamas, inertia, resistance. No, come back tomorrow. Or I can give you active opposition. This is no good, your application is discarded because you missed a comma. It happens. Prove that you exist. My records show that you are dead, and unless you can prove to me that you are alive, that you are the person you claim to be, I'm sorry, I can't process your request. It happens in India also. An active opposition, or some kind of harmonization. All right, these are your lacuna, these are your strengths, let's find out via media and we work something out as a compromise. But there are no other responses possible. So all guna, all quality of this rich experience that we have of the universe is really these three responses of consciousness meeting what? Consciousness, because there is nothing else. Creating in your mind, in your perception, the appearances of forms and structures and all the rest that you see. So when the fourfold soul powers of consciousness flow out to express, they work through the three gunas of nature. Interestingly, our three bodies, the physical body, the life body, and the mind body, are predominantly ruled by one of these three qualities. The physical body temperamentally is one of inertia. If you do nothing, it tends to subside and become, well, rigid. That's what happens when the life force withdraws, it dies. Inertia. The life energy temperamentally is one of kinesis, rajas. And if you do nothing, it keeps wanting to be restless and act and do. It must be tired by the body to make it go to sleep. Otherwise, it will keep on doing. And the mind temperamentally is always trying to understand and come to the right alignment and rearrange things to make perfect. Sattva. Order, harmony. But each is in each, remember? So within the body there are all three grades further. Within the life force there are all three grades. Within the mind there is an inertia in the mind also, and a kinesis of the mind also. But primarily the mind represents the sattvic aspect. And so these 4 entering get as if spread out and broken up into these 3 modifiers and working through them, and you have a rich mix of 12. And further within those sub-4s, sub-3s, and you can see all the complexity of our human experience comes from this rich mix. Each of these impulses has a lower working and a higher working, which makes again for a much larger variation, and so on. This is just to give you a background of how the yogic view looks at life, looks at consciousness, and from this view how the whole thing changes meaning and possibilities are so different. If you could go to the essence of the consciousness behind and modify its qualities, I could turn the red rose into violet or white simply by modifying the quality from within. There is the famous example of Vasishtha Ganapati Muni, one of the rare rishis of modern India, that was 100 years ago. And he was an extraordinary figure. During his tapasya, he would wander in many places in India. He had also come to the ashram, met the mother and Sri Aurobindo. In one of the places where he stayed, it is recorded that he was staying with a reasonably poor family, and he would sit with the children as his way of service to the family for their support, to look after him. He would play with the children and tell them stories from the traditions. And then when his work was done, he had to leave. He felt he had to help the family because of their extreme poverty. So he asked for a little coin, which the child was playing with, 1 anna or 1 paisa, 1 cent, took it in his hand and held it as he narrated his stories. And when it was done, he gave it back, and it had been transformed into gold. The sheer pressure of consciousness on what? Not structure of molecules and atoms, on consciousness. Consciousness meeting consciousness can modify the bundle of qualities, and that's simple enough, right? Look, when we are expressing ourselves as a person, the bundle of qualities we express is what we call character or personality. The rigid part is the character, the more dynamic part is our personality. And if we can turn into ourselves and recast ourselves from within, well, we express a different personality. We're often doing that when we switch jobs, when we meet from one person to another. When I meet the person who's my boss, I'm, yes sir. And when I meet my friend, I'm, hi, how are you? And this switch of bundle of qualities is happening constantly. And if we can enter the consciousness within and compel its shift of quality, well, the pattern of atoms and molecules will change appearance. And you'll have a different substance. It's not such a big deal when you think about it. But what this perspective offers you is the ease with which things can change. And if our consciousness can change in mind and in heart so easily from person to person, from moment to moment, why not in body? Which is also a bundle of energy and quality, isn't it? Without limit, potentially. When the body is made conscious and is not primarily expressive of inertia, its rigidity shifts and it can become more plastic in its expression. So plastic, in fact, but that a shift internally of the state of consciousness can even create a shift in form or in behavior of form. Illnesses could be recast, dissolved, or form changed. This is recorded in one of the letters to Sri Aurobindo, where some of the disciples had commented about this to him. Someone asked him, how is it that the mother's appearance changes so much? We see her different in the morning, different in the afternoon, and different in the evening. And Sri Aurobindo explains that her body is so conscious and so plastic that depending on the state of consciousness that she expresses, the form of the body can change. Now, I have heard this live in an interview from one of the ashram's teachers. We have it on record. Tanmayada, for those who might know, he was a Frenchman who lived in the ashram, taught in the school. He was very close to Pavitra, who was another Frenchman, named by Sri Aurobindo Pavitra. And after Pavitra passed away, Tanmay was depressed. He went to the mother, he was inconsolably crying. And mother tried to console him but could not. Eventually mother said, "Why do you cry? He is within me." And Tanmay said, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah," but he continues to cry. Mother finally told him, "Do you want to see?" And this surprised him. And then he says, mother looked at him and smiled. And instantly the shape of her face changed and became that of Pavitra, smiling. And after a few moments, again shifted back, became what she was used normally. And he said, "I saw this with my own eyes." He had tears when he was narrating. But that's the kind of possibility that exists in our whole being. In fact, this is what is happening to us over years, and therefore we don't notice it. There's a saying, and it's true if you observe carefully, that couples tend to resemble each other. Well, if you had married somebody else, you would end up resembling something else, right? But what is it that makes it so? More obviously, dogs tend to resemble their masters or vice versa. Have you noticed that? There's an interesting correlation. Why is that? When there's such a deep exchange of energy that takes place, the form being an expression of your energy also tends to shift, but gradually over time. As some molecules are replaced by others, as the food you eat replaces the cells that die, gradual shifts build up over time, and in a few years you begin to notice certain things. Interesting. And if it can happen over a few years as an expression of your current state of energy and consciousness, if the body was sufficiently conscious, why not the same happen within a few weeks, or a few days, or a few seconds even? Illness is built the same way. A knot of energy around which accumulates new substance until it becomes a tumor. But if you could undo the knot and the substance was plastic enough, you could dissolve the tumor very quickly, which also happens. And you can see then the whole expression of your being is essentially one of expression of freedom, plasticity, limited only by the inertia of the past habits of our evolution. Otherwise, there is no limit to what is possible. Consider, looking back the last 100 years or more, that the Olympic Games have been going on. Remember, Olympic Games represent almost the peak of human achievement in certain fields. Consider that across the 100+ years, we have had 100-meter records, the fastest that a human being is able to run, being broken again and again and again every 4 years. And when we reach the point, we say, beyond this, it's not physiologically possible to go faster. Someone ends up breaking that record. And interestingly, after one person has broken it, many seem to follow easily. You've heard of the 4-minute mile challenge? It seemed impossible for a long time. And then one day, someone did it. Soon after, several people did it, and soon after, many more people did it, and pretty soon it became almost the norm for the experts. Those who really prepare their body well, unless you hit the 4-minute mile, you're nowhere near the top. Don't bother even trying. What's happening? The human potential is being pushed to the limit of the body's physiological capacity. The laws of physics working within the biology are being pushed to their limit. How far can this go? Will we reach a stage where we will say, well, here physics ends and your biology cannot do more? Or will we find that the biology can adapt further and even stretch that limit? One would expect that, I believe. Potentially there's no limitation, except that the slow process of pushing the limits is nature's evolution. The rapid progress is the conscious into-out evolution. And the power which can make that change, yes, you can use the body to train the body. It'll go so far. But when the consciousness within pours out and modifies, it can go so much farther. I'm tempted to share here the example of the bodybuilder, what's his name? Arnold Schwarzenegger. As a young child in the school, he was the weakest, most sickly child. Frail, biologically deficient in his heredity, as a doctor would say. And one day suddenly he gets this inspiration and he says, I'm going to be the world's strongest man. If he had said this to his parents or his teachers, they might have rebuked him, chided him, ridiculed him. I don't think he said it, but he worked at it. And he pursued a sustained discipline over years until he actually became Mr. Universe. Again and again, for 7 years, successively, he beat all his rivals by such a large margin that there was no hope for others, and he stopped participating to give a chance for others to win. If you listen to how he trained his body, certain deep yogic principles are implied there. One of the things he says, if I see that there's one muscle in my arm which is not perfectly crafted, which is not strong enough, I don't work on just that one muscle. I work on my whole body. You see the ocean image? You want the wave? Well, the whole ocean has to lean to become the wave. You want to develop one muscle? The entire body must reshape itself for that one muscle. And everything then is participating in that one muscle's development. He said it's not enough to hold a pose where the muscles bulge for the purpose of the exam where they test you. He said the transition from one position to another must also be harmonious and perfect, for which he practiced ballet. If he had practiced yoga, it might have been even more useful perhaps, but ballet was good enough. It forced the body to become flexible, conscious, and to make movements which were harmonious, fluid. And the result was a body which was made so conscious that literally one can will it to take on a form and a certain glow. And that's the reason why he was so far ahead of everybody else. There were other aspects to it also, but this is an indication of what is possible. He overcame his genetic, hereditary destiny by a conscious discipline and conscious intention working inside out. And what we realize from this perspective is, from within or deep within us is that all potential, the same potential that creates the universe, the same consciousness and the same power with the same potential intensity working within, forming all this, working through all this. Potentially there is no limit. If you tap into the source and from the source rebuild, you have the power of the source. And so we will generalize it to two principles: to grow from in to out, to activate from within outward, and to grow from top down, to invoke the higher consciousness and the higher power which has the greater knowledge and power. To engage that, to articulate, manifest that, that's the means by which we can most rapidly grow to our highest, fullest potential. And that movement acquires a fourfold character first, and from there a 12-fold expression. So I was discussing how within the four you have the four and so on, mixing with the three and all that, that whole complexity, instead of studying and fighting in the detail, you can step back, hold an intention in the origin and imprint that intention, and it works out in the detail on its own, because all the rest is an expression of this. So you can hold an intention in your body consciousness for it to become healthy without specifically working on parts, and the body shape even can change. I've seen this in the example of my teacher, MP Pandit. He was the mother's secretary, and an extraordinary example. And at some point he had a heart condition. The doctors told him he has to reduce his weight. So he was given a certain number. He asked how much, he was given a number. He didn't worry too much about what it was. All he did was, he would check his weight once a week. The only change he brought in his food was, they would put the rice on his plate and a bowl of whatever, dal or vegetables. He would cut out a small part of the rice and push it away and eat the rest. All he did was, he changed the quantum of rice by its symbolic quantity, pushing away. That's it. He was eating exactly the same thing. He would check his weight once a week It kept dropping until it hit the number that he wanted, and then it stayed rock steady on that. That's it, he had to do nothing more. An intention imprinted in the body, and it worked. The external verification was only to see which point it had reached, and that was all. In my own example, I experienced this initially. For many years I was on a raw food diet, and as a result I was always not sufficiently padded. I looked thin. And at some point I tried to increase my weight. I had returned to normal diet and I tried to increase weight. It wouldn't increase. I tried different foods. I tried increasing food. It didn't increase. And I said, this is the wrong way. I must consult my body. So I tried to feel what in my body, what does my body say? What does it need to grow in weight? And the feel was, and the body does not give you pictures, it gives you a sensation, and the sensation translates into an image. So the sensation, the feel was, if I take warm rice, put 1 spoon of ghee on top, and eat that. The body felt this was what it needed. So I said, okay, I took the rice, I put the ghee, and I started the process. In about 6 months, I put on 5 kilos. Pretty good. Listening to the body, it knows what it wants. And then I was traveling. I was out of station. I didn't have ghee, I didn't have rice. I was out of the country. There was cheese. It was in Europe. So I said, okay, but if ultimately it's the consciousness, the intention of the consciousness working in the body, I don't have to worry about ghee and rice. I would take the cheese, I would take that food, and with the same intention, the same feel, continue that movement. And in 1 month, I put on 5 kilos. And it stayed, it never dropped. After that, I didn't have to change anything in my diet. Overall, the weight stayed. I give these as examples of what's possible in the physical consciousness, which is the most resistant, if you can tap into it and work inside out and top down. And the same, of course, in the mind and your emotions. You can reshape your entire character. You find yourself temperamentally to get upset easily, you find yourself to have some aspects of inertia in certain activities. All that can be reshaped. And then in the work that you express, the same truth can be expanded, extended. My purpose in highlighting this is to change our understanding of what is possible, or how easy it is to change these things. Everything is possible, everything can be changed, everything can be recast if you follow a steady discipline in to out, top down. And we must hold this conviction, we must stick to it and never let go of this. Even illnesses can be reshaped inside out. I had promised to give time for the questions and answers, so I think at this stage I will pause. We can take up any questions, and then a few things which I want to say, I will try to weave them into our further discussion.
So, the question that I had was the difference between feelings and emotions. I personally thought it was intertwined, or it's all in the heart.
What do you mean by feelings?
Feelings, from what Adil had mentioned, is in the heart, but emotions are in the belly.
Who said that?
Adil said that, and I couldn't tell the difference between the two. I thought they were one and the same.
Okay.
So if you could explain.
A lot of this goes back to vocabulary. The word feeling in English is also, this feels cold. I feel happy. You're using the same feeling word. So a lot depends on vocabulary, which can also vary in different spaces. So perhaps you have been used to using the word emotions even in the heart. I wouldn't give that particular issue too much importance. If that's the main point is, in his vocabulary he is consistent in that description, and as long as you understand what that means, you modify your vocabulary to suit that context.
So the greed or the jealousy?
There are things you feel in the belly which are very distinct. There are things you feel in the heart which are very distinct. What name you give to them is a question of convention. Things in the belly are often of a lower grade. Lower because they are less conscious. You feel Jealousy, anger, hatred, they're often felt in the lower part. And these are impulses which are not rational. They're very difficult to modify because you're not even conscious of where it comes from. Whereas there are things which appear in the heart which are much more aware, much more awake, and you are in them much more and you can modify them.
So if I'm happy or sad, it's happy or sad in the heart?
What do you feel? Your evidence is in your experience. There was a question from somebody about, they said they did not hear any of us speak of karma. What is the place of karma in all this? Particularly it was in the context of the choice of the soul in rebirths. How much are we really bound? It's one of those who from the group that just left. Karma, the word itself means action, activity. There's another term we use, prarabdha. Arabdha is begun, pra-arabdha is begun before. That which was begun before. That is much more descriptive of the thing which we're speaking of. Unfortunately, over time, and because of the way, again, it's a convention, the way the words get used, eventually, especially in the West, karma is associated with bad karma and a reaction of karma. Oh, that's your karma, meaning you're suffering because of bad past actions. But the word itself has nothing to do with bad or to do with past. Prarabdha, again, that which was begun before, specifically relates to things begun in the past which continue into the now, but again, not necessarily negative. Prarabdha is that which has begun before and is continuing in you, but because of context and repeated context, we tend to associate with the negative. You have a problem, that's your prarabdha, that's your karma. You did bad stuff, you're paying for it. But if you look at the big picture, everything you do has a ripple of consequence. The interpretation of good and bad is how your mind formulates it. In those of you who have met astrologers or had your chart read, you'll find typically the way they work. Oh, Shani. Oh my God, you have a Shani cycle. Bad for you. Poor Shani. He's a priest. He's a priest, he's a servant, he's a hard worker. What he represents in the chart are these qualities: service and celibate, dedicated, working hard for a particular cause. And so, if you have a strong Shani influence right now, it's bad because that means you have to work hard. That means you're going to be not necessarily celibate, but you'll be kind of in isolation for a while in certain ways perhaps. Or some struggles. But on the other hand, you look at it from a yogic perspective, wow, that's the time when I'm going to learn a lot, I'm going to grow rapidly perhaps. Good. You see, the same bad becomes good. But these are, very weak understandings, mixed understandings, thumb rules that they apply mechanically, not seeing what the thing represents truly behind. And this is the problem with prarabdha. We look at some pattern, and if right now that pattern is bumping into what I want to do, that's bad. Not necessarily. The thing though to recognize is, prarabdha is only one level of pattern of continuation. There are other levels where it's not as mechanical as with the belly emotion versus heart emotion or sensation. It's not as mechanical when you go higher up in consciousness. So let's say you have a knock on the arm, as a result of which a few years down you keep having pain in the arm. Well, that's prarabdha. But your consciousness can be free of this, can impose its freedom on this and get free of it completely. So you do a little bit of exercise every day, you do some yogasanas, you put some visualized intentions, and pretty soon it's gone. What happened to the karma? Where did it go? You see? It's not mathematical. This is the point Sri Aurobindo makes. Karma is not mathematics. It's not that if I've hit you once, you must hit me back once. If I've hit you twice, then you will hit me twice. It doesn't work like that. Everything is fluid, and the higher always overrides the lower. The idea of a mechanical karma is very strong in certain traditions, and particularly it seems to originate more from the Buddhist tradition, and for a reason. In the Buddhist tradition, they threw out God and soul. There is no God, there is no soul. There is only one gigantic energy working, and therefore karma is a mechanical, mathematical product. The moment you bring back soul and bring back God, then the freedom of the soul and the freedom of the divine consciousness can override, modify, and change freely the karma. Isn't it? In terms of our relation with karma itself, we have to remind ourselves the higher grace can modify the karma, neutralize it, or override it, or modify it. The same negative impulse can be turned to become a positive help for you. There's a very interesting incident which took place when the mother was working with a businessman in Pondicherry to help him develop the sugar mills. And there were a lot of difficulties, and it was mother's way of testing the collaboration of nature. They had a land which had no water, and sugar mills need huge amounts of water. They did all the kinds of dowsing and all. They didn't get water. Mother asked for a map of the land, took a pencil and put a mark and said, dig here. They went back, they dug there, and they hit water at 3 different levels which had such high pressure they did not even need pumps. The water just gushed out. And when we interviewed the owner of this factory 30 plus years later, he said, it's still gushing out as before. Just as one example. So there, initially when they set up the machinery kept breaking down. And they couldn't figure out why. So again they reported to the mother. And mother studied the situation, and then she informed the owner. She said, I've set it right. The sugarcane that was being crushed was angry at being crushed and was releasing this vehemence of anger, and that energy was destroying the machines. So she said she created an occult formation where the same energy being released would now be turned to protect the factory. And as happened, the owner said to us, after that there are no further problems. The same energy can be turned to a positive supporting result than what it was originally flowing with. Interesting, isn't it? So when dealing with karma, the grace can modify anyway and can just dissolve it if it wants. That's the nature of the self's freedom. All is itself, it can modify anything. But on our personal level, also recognize that the level at which you created the karma is the level at which it hits you. If you have moved in level of consciousness, it ceases to touch you and the energy simply dissipates. If I've created an energy of anger, hatred, and as long as I live in that poise of anger, hatred, the things I've thrown out in my anger come back to me and hit me and bind me. If meanwhile I've gone through a purification and I've risen above that tendency and I'm free of it, that energy of anger thrown out comes back. It cannot touch me, it passes through, it dissipates. What happens is you have thrown out an energy, having fulfilled itself, depleted itself, the imprint, the bundle comes back to you to re-energize, suck your energy and get energized, go back again. That's how it works. If when it comes back to take your anger energy, you don't have any left, what happens to it? It depletes, eventually fizzles out. The cycle is broken. And equally, having put out one energy negative, you can put out a positive energy, which neutralizes or dissolves the negative. And finally, you can invoke the grace, which can change anything. So, the reason why we have not given too much importance to karma is this. From the yogic perspective, we would want to highlight the aspect of the freedom of the soul. And yes, karma is one of the many devices that it uses in nature and is not bound by it. And we should not accept to be bound by it. When you go to consult an astrologer, and he tells you, be careful, for the next 1 month you may have accidents because of this. What you've done is allowed a subconscious imprint to exist. Oh my God, I have to watch out for accidents. And even if there was such a tendency, you have accepted it and it gets greater force. The other makes a comment which is quite disturbing if you think about what it means for humanity. She says, when you pay attention to the planets, they pay more attention to you. So culture which is obsessed with astrology and tries to orient itself entirely to Vastu and subtle energies by whatever technique or system of belief, binds itself into that system and its consequences. And that's why I said it's disturbing. Because the fact is, yes, there is a truth to these things. I've myself studied these things and verified their validity as well as their limitations. But the moment you accept it and embed yourself into that system, you become its victim. And then for you, that becomes a compulsion. And it's so much better to free yourself from it. Yes, there are these things accepted. Yes, there is a weather prediction from the Weather Bureau. They have a science of predicting, but the prediction is of percentages of probabilities. Things can change. We can even ask for rain or ask for the rain to stop. That also works. And so we should choose to be in the poise of the freedom of the soul and the freedom of the grace and invoke that every time, not bind ourselves to karma. Yes.
I have two questions. I'll ask the first one first, and that pertains to your talk this morning. You mentioned intuition, and my question is that intuitive knowledge, is that a function of mind or brain or consciousness?
When the universe is, let's say, manifested, the power that forms, that flows into those rhythms of bundles of cells, of the particles, and builds all of these systems and structures, that power is utterly conscious of all that it builds. Being utterly aware of it, that knowledge is the most complete knowledge that exists. It knows everything. That's the, if we may use this phrase, mind of God, which forms the universe. It knows everything because it is everything and it is in everything.
So it's a part of consciousness?
The power of consciousness, its awareness is itself its knowledge. But not only is knowledge, it's also the power to be what it wants to be. It's knowledge, power, knowledge, will. Of which our mind is a tiny part, a little whirlpool inside the ocean. And as long as we're stuck in our little whirl, that's all the knowledge we can contain. When our whirlpool ceases to separate itself from the ocean and opens out and identifies with the ocean, we share in that full knowledge that already pre-exists. Where? Here, in our own consciousness, in our own higher parts, where we are one with that. So when you view it in this way, it's not something your brain produces, it's not a process of your mind, it's a state of consciousness that knows already, of which you are a part, and therefore you're not separate from it, and therefore you can access it. What separates you is a veil of habit or an activity which conceals and blocks the full access.
So what is the difference between intuition, clairvoyance, or reading somebody's like mind? What is the difference between the three? How do they work?
Intuition, clairvoyance, mind reading,
Like ESP?
ESP. Yes, they are all powers of consciousness. Okay? What is clairvoyance? There are many forms to it. One of the forms is being able to see things which are not visible. Sensing your thoughts, sensing your emotions, or sometimes at a distance, even sensing thoughts, emotions at a distance, or sensing things happening at a distance. How would you explain that? Not by biological functions, but by the nature of consciousness. Now, this building, for example, the walls of this building are experiencing a certain stress of the weight of the roof. Okay? The stress goes down through pillars onto the foundations of the building. None of this we can see, none of this we can know by conventional means. We could, of course, image it by machines like X-rays and other things and kind of measure it out and make a map of it. But who knows what is actually happening inside the building and its stresses? The building itself. It experiences the stress. It is one with the stress of the weight, pressure. Now, if your consciousness, being separate, can remove the veils of separation and become one with the building, you will experience its form, you will experience its substance as yourself. And you'll experience the tension which is inside it, the stresses. And in your mind, an image of that stress tension pattern will form until you see, feel, are one with the building and its stresses. And when you feel that and feel, see, and are one with it, you will know, oh yeah, there's too much pressure on the right side. I need to relieve the pressure. If I can put a little support here, that will be a relief. It won't fall so easily. And you know what you need to do. So I'll give you an example. When the Golconda was being designed, this is one of the model buildings that the mother had made, which was designed by a Japanese architect, and it was supposed to be a model for the future constructions. And then the engineers had to turn that architecture into engineering drawings, and they had a problem. They could not figure out how to hold the weight of the building and balance the stresses with the particular pattern of pillars he had set. They couldn't solve the problem. And we heard the story from the head of the engineering department. Having given up, they went to the mother and said, "Mother, we have a problem. We don't know how to do this." She said, "Bring the drawings." She looked at the drawing and put a mark and said, "Here, you put the pillar here." They go back, they do their calculations, everything works out. So he comes back, "Mother, you have never studied engineering. How did you know this?" And she said, "Well, I just looked at it and it was obvious."
How do you attain that knowledge of clairvoyance?
How do you attain to that knowledge? I'm going to put it in this way. The essential capacity is already within you. There are two things which prevent you from accessing it. First, habit of your upbringing in a large part. And second, agitation in your consciousness, which screens that layer where you already have access. So, habit in your upbringing. Little children, you will notice, they sense things. And what do we do as adults? We dismiss what they sense. You see a dog barking somewhere at a corner of a room and there's no one there. Hey, why is this fellow barking? He's crazy. Poof. A child senses and is unhappy about something. Oh, that's just your imagination. That's just a dream. How often have you heard that? That's just a dream. Well, all dreams, all imaginations represent something which you are perceiving. And the moment you've been taught to ignore that, to cut it off, well, you grow up with a whole part of reality that you've been taught to ignore as not real. And then in your adult age, that faculty is still operating behind the scenes. You just don't know it, you don't register it, you've learned to block it out. And so there's a whole unlearning there. Very quickly that can be unlearned. But the second part is, we're so used to relying upon our current physical senses. Consider how your mind is actually seeing. Who's seeing first? Not your physical sight. That's only translating light into electrical signals which go to your brain. Brain doesn't see either, it only processes the signals. Who sees? Your mind. You. Right? The image appears where? Not in the brain, in your mind. Who's the actual seer? Mind. Where is mind? How does mind plug into the brain and the eyesight channels? Habit. And as children, our mind is actually more free. That's why it was sensing things directly. And we can similarly teach the mind to disengage from the physical channels of sense and directly turn to anything. It's a very simple exercise, a series of steps of training by which one can teach the mind to do that. Except that the moment you begin to do it, there's a lot of clutter that comes in the way. And you must then learn to sift through that clutter because there's so much junk in the mental zone. You know, we speak of pollution of the physical world, you're putting poisons in the waters and then you have noise pollution, but there's something called thought pollution and emotional pollution, which is a lot of clutter. You can walk into a room and you can feel, oh my God, this is so full of thought forms because of the people who have lived or worked there. And there are spaces you can go to which are completely clear, no thought forms, no emotional formations, it's clear. And there your mind becomes naturally calm. You enter a space which is cluttered with junk of thoughts, your mind again catches those and starts working, becomes hyperactive. But you have to then learn to be able to distinguish, to cut through those. I'll give an example here which is quite amusing. I had a friend in Delhi. He was a businessman, he was deep into astrology. That was his way of finding stability in the uncertainty of his life. So he would consult any astrologer. And one day he had told me, I found the best. This man can predict things down to the minute. I said, okay, I have doubts because that's not possible, because things don't work that way. Okay. I said, sure, we'll meet. So we were in the car, we were traveling. And so my friend turned to this astrologer and said, okay, look at him and say what is his ascending sign. Now I'm a tall person, so there are only two possible signs that could be the ascendant for a tall person. Now this is pure raw data of astrology. You don't have to have any genius insight. It could be this or that. He had only to guess between two. And immediately that he asked this question, I thought, okay, let me test whether this guy is actually mind reading or whether he's doing astrology. So I put the idea of sign 6, like dangling it before him. I just had a strong formation of 6, dangled it before him. Now if he's doing astrology, he's doing an analysis, he will catch the 6th suggestion, but he will cut through it. If he's just mind reading, he will catch whatever glimpse of thought content is there. And he said 6. And my friend was disappointed. He said, 6 ascendant cannot be tall. What are you talking about? Where's your astrology? Try again. Again I dangled 6. Now any thinking person would say, I've just been proved wrong once, would not repeat. And again he says 6. He's not even thinking. It was a great disappointment. Then I told my friend, no, it's just I put that suggestion, hang it in the air. But it's not such a big deal when you think about it. Most of these astrologers who are very effective are basically mind readers. You come to them, they catch what you're thinking, what you're worried about, feed it back to you, you go back impressed. But there's not much there, nothing much useful. I'm saying this as an example of the kind of junk that you have to cut through. Because in the domain of mind, all the ideas, all the intentions people put out are perceived or sensed as real, living things. So to have the true sight, to be able to cut through that, one has to develop a kind of a poise of discrimination, of intuition. But still the seeing works, you sense something, and you sense this muddle, and then you're able to catch, this is it. So again, the training for this would be to train your mind to become quiet, to become like a mirror reflecting. Turn that mirror or intention in the quiet to the thing you wish to know, and wait. Sometimes forms emerge, sometimes suggestions come, you wait until there's the click of the recognition. That's it. And these things can be trained. All of us have the capacity already inherent. Sri Aurobindo Win points out in his writings on education that it's very likely that in the future, the training of these higher faculties of mind, they're all faculties, the training of these would be part of our conventional educational system. Not as magical powers, but as the normal faculty of an awakened mind. Yes.
In reference to the karma theory, you mentioned Hindu religion do believe in reincarnation and also strong about the karma theory. Whatever you did in the past life, no matter what happens in the next life, you have to face it in the result. So, but you said you can change those karma. No matter, you don't have to face it, but then you can do the good thing in this life. So, in next life you don't have to suffer.
Okay. So the question is about what you did in the past coming into this life, what you do in this life coming into the next, and the possibility of change. So I'm going to first question this. Why does your past life have to work itself out in this life? Why not it work out in this very same life? Think about it. If you generate a certain pattern of energies and put out certain energies and imprints of forces, why not it work itself out right now? Why should it wait for your next life? In fact, a lot of it does work out in the very same. It's just the way it's been popularized, and it's done more in the sense of reward and punishment, which is not how karma works. They will say, oh, this fellow, he's so bad, he will suffer in his next life. I know. But that's the way it starts. But why will he suffer in his next life? Because this life is so powerful, no one can really beat him to it. Right? He's so dominating. But in fact, he already suffers in a different way. The anger or hatred that he has thrown, the suffering he has caused to people, comes back and eats him up in a different way, on a different level. He's miserable, he's unhappy, sometimes he gets diseased. Many things can happen in the pattern of energy he's thrown out coming back. And yes, some of it does continue because it cannot get exhausted in this life, and it does continue until he either overcomes it or gets free of it in some way. But all of this still applies to people who are living mechanically, not people who are living consciously. The moment you begin to live consciously, you are already exercising a greater freedom. Isn't it?
So, just one. So, there are people who are born poor. Some of them are rich, some of them are successful, some of them are failure no matter how hard they work. Is that theory of the karma, or it's just the...
So, karma will play a role in the forms of success, poverty and wealth also. It will play a role. But the soul's choice will have a greater influence here. Sri Aurobindo gives this example of how a soul that has had a very wealthy life as a king, experiencing comforts, facing very few points of resistance, may at the end of the life say, well, I've had this very comfortable experience. What's it like to experience life without all this? Wouldn't that be interesting? And it will choose to take birth in a poor environment, to experience poverty and lack and the struggle and resistance or opposition of circumstances. Now, you can't say he's punished by karma. It's the choice of the soul. So, like I said, karma is not about punishment and reward. And our idea of a rich person being somehow rewarded for some good is also wrong. The concept of reward and punishment does not come in karma. It is energy you put out having consequence. That's all. I push, I am pushed. I throw negative energy, I end up being accumulated with negative energy. I put out positive energy, I find myself surrounded by positive energies. It's not punishment or reward in any sense. At least that's not how the karma process works. But yes, if I have put out a lot of positive energy, it coming back to me may offer environmental support for what I am doing being more easily done. So you will say, he's being rewarded for the good things he did. But it was not a judgment, it was just the consequence of that energy. So when you start thinking like this, the thing becomes much simpler, and these questions will become obvious.
The Brahma Kumari talks so much about this karma theory. It's like everything is karma, karma, karma. So I don't.
I've heard people say things like everything is karma. And it's a bit of a simplification. That would mean there's nothing else to the universe. It's just one giant brute machine. A bit of a dark image. It was about this topic. Yes.
To refer to karma because there is a very interesting shift from Vedic karma. Vedic karma is totally different than in the post-Vedic literature, and that's exactly where the whole problem lies. Yeah? Vedic karma is the sacrifice. It is something we must do as a spirit here for nature to transform it. So, and when we shift the paradigm towards the more individualistic consciousness, it becomes preoccupation of what is happening to us through our activities. And there, that, what you rightly said, Buddhism takes over, and Buddhism influences Hinduism, and it takes this notion of karma totally different. Before Buddhism, it is different. Even in the Gita, it is different karma. It's not this karma that a consequence of your work. It's not a consequence, it's what you are looking to engage with. First as a group soul and then as an individual. It doesn't need to be consequential.
Yes.
No, the same thing I was thinking, like if it's a soul who selects, I want to see how it's good to be poor. But then there's a society always feels like, sympathetic, be sympathetic. It's the soul chose it, right? So it's there's a confusion, but the body currently doesn't know what I chose to be. And then I'm thinking differently, then I'm comparing, then as a soul, maybe a different choice, but as a thinking person, it is a different choice. There is no connection.
You see, as a society, it is part of the responsibility of society to ensure there's nobody who has a lack. Inequalities will be there because we are different people, but no fundamental lack, and everyone has an opportunity equally. What you make of that opportunity will depend on much of the prarabdha, the things that you bring with you, including the choice, let's say, of the king to have taken birth in a poor space. What happens after that is what he does. And what does he do? If he comes with all that kingliness of the work built up in his inner being, he takes that circumstance of poverty and out of that builds his entire life. These are the great stories you will hear. This man, from zero, he built up an entire empire. Why? Because he was that kind of soul, came for this experience and he did what he had to do. Somebody else, because the soul's intention was not to build an empire, but just to experience that simple life, well, he will stay reasonably poor, comfortable within the poverty, not being very wealthy, and do the thing he came to do. His goal was not to overcome the poverty or overcome circumstances, but maybe be an artist, creative in his own space. So a lot of that happens in the line the soul has chosen for the particular experience of growth in that life.
Other thing is there is a family karma, nation karma, so all that comes.
Yes. So there is also this idea of a collective karma. If you are part of a collectivity which has a certain backlog or pattern of energy imprint, well, you're subject to it as a community, as a family, even as a nation. And yes, these things do act. And there's always a mix of forces. But my point is, all of these mixes of karmic forces, of prarabdha, are of a certain grade. And they stop at that grade. There are higher forces which are freer, including the force of your conscious will. Now, if the karma, for example, okay, think of it as an image. You're on a river. The river is flowing in a certain direction. You jump into the water, you do nothing, it's going to take you there. That's your karma. Okay? You start swimming, you can go wherever you want. If you go upstream, it takes harder, it's longer, more difficult, but still you can do it. Now you take a boat, put up a sail, and with small manipulation of the sail, you can use the wind which is going in a different direction from the water to navigate and go in a different direction. You use a higher power of the conscious will. You switch on a motorboat and you can go any direction you want, right? So there are many different levels of forces, activating energies, and you can tap into the higher ones which can override and modify the lower ones, including collective karmas can be dissolved. There's one incident which comes to mind which was narrated to us by somebody in the ashram. Their family had some issues. Somebody in their family was going through extreme problems. Some astrologer had declared that this problem will go on for so many months because that was the cycle in his chart. They reported to the mother, and from the next day all the problems vanished. They came back and reported to the mother that the problems vanished since we informed you, and the mother said, yes, I have erased his karma. What do you want? What would you prefer? To take back your karma? There's a very interesting letter of Sri Aurobindo in this regard. Somebody having come to the ashram and having been accepted by them, he wrote to Sri Aurobindo, my family wants me to go back to some so-and-so person who is the family guru and to take initiation from him. And Sri Aurobindo replies, when you came to us, we took upon ourselves the burden of your karma. Now this is what the Guru does. Takes the burden of the weight which is on you, so that you may work freely. And then he says, if you go back to that person and get initiation from him, the entire burden will come back to you. Understand? The initiation is not a joke, it's not a social exercise, it's not a social ceremony, it has a spiritual import. At least as far as the real spirituality is concerned. And then there are social gurus also and social exercises of this kind. You go through this, so and so sprinkles water, he does a prayer, oh now you're initiated. There may be no force behind it. Or there may be a vicious force behind it equally, which uses that occasion to grab onto you and not let go. And Mother refers to these also. One has to be very careful when it comes to these things. And if in your consciousness you feel you have been accepted and the burden of the weight of your burden has been taken by the Guru, that is your heart's choice, then it's best not to play around with these things. The point is, this can be done. The Divine is able to take the entire burden off from you in order to assist in your forward progress. The condition is, you should be willing to give it up, of course. If you take it back and say, my karma, then you take back the baggage. And that's the reason why I raised this discussion. It's extremely important for all of us to make that choice. We offer the burden of all that, refuse to take it anymore in our conscious alignment to the Divine. And that's the better way, the better choice. And literally it's a new birth. And from that point you'll feel the weight lifted and everything becomes easier. Ask for that to be taken off from you. Give it up entirely and refuse to take it.
Is that Sarva Dharma Parityajya?
It includes that also, includes that.
Can I say something? Oh.
How would you explain early child death? Why the soul selected that body and born and then die again?
The question of early child death, the mother explained that in certain cases when the soul enters to take birth, it is attracted to a space or a form because of a certain alignment of the vibes that it is seeking. But having entered the body, it may discover that the body is defective, or the environment is not what it really sought, that it has been misled. And so it leaves quickly, rather than taking it up and being stuck in it. In many cases it is like that. Occasionally it is, of course, accidental also.
I want to thank you for your beautiful words. You speak so beautifully about everything. I'm wondering if you're willing to share personal, spiritual challenges of yours on the path of conscious evolution.
Anything particular that you're looking for?
A current, real spiritual challenge.
You know, we pass through many transitions, through many stages in our journey. And rather than, because of the nature of the space and the time now, rather than looking at the challenges, I would like to point out that the common feature across all challenges was some part within us that is resistant to change or rebellious to change, which becomes the cause of a challenge. The common resolution for all those challenges was a becoming conscious of that part and consciously opening it to the light and the action of the Mother's force and grace. There is no problem within us which cannot be overcome by the power that manifested the universe, because the problem is a part of that manifestation. And that power has the freedom to recast anything. This is in essence the message of one of the tasks of Hercules. The 12 tasks of Hercules are 12 spiritual tasks, really. They have a deep symbolism. And there is this task where he has to clean the Aegean stables and free the horses. And the image, which will be obvious to you, the Aegean stables have 1,000 horses tied up. You see the number 1,000 and horses, what they represent, energies, potentialities within us. And the droppings of the horses are so full that anybody entering the stables suffocates and falls unconscious. You see, this is the perfect description of the subconscious within. You enter it and you lose consciousness. But therein are 1,000 energies waiting to be liberated. How does he clean it? He doesn't enter. He sees there's a river nearby. He cuts a channel from the river to the stables. And the waters pour through and clean out the stables. He walks in freely, releases the horses. All our problems are really knots which block out the light. That's why they are problems. And the best means is to invoke the light onto that part. Instead of saying, my anger, my depression, my problem, where you take it and make it yours, refusing to let go. You say, not my problem, not my depression, not my anger. Here, Divine Mother, I give it to you. But it means internally you go through an introspective process. Identify and isolate the problem. You don't have to know in mental terms, you don't have to give it names. You just feel where there's this impulse within me which comes up, not so nice. Identify, become aware of it, isolate it. Surround it in your awareness, and then as if gently open it up. And release it, open it to the light. If you get into it, you get stuck and it gets a messy process. It can be done also that way, but it's messy and slow. You open it to the light and the light pours and gently begins the process of dissolution. And very quickly, sometimes within days, a problem that has persisted for years can be dissolved. And sometimes instantaneously it happens. It's gone and never again. The only error you might make is, it's gone, where is it, where is it? And you pull it back, you call it back almost. Now it's there. My problem. When it's gone, you say, thank God, finished. No more, ever again. But these are things which happen as we grow. So the message, to a general question, this would be my general response. And this is much more useful rather than talking of what issues one has had. That's interesting also, but this is the real principle we need to recognize in everything in our journey, including external problems.
Any tips on how to fight tamoguna?
Tamas, inertia. How to overcome inertia? The best way is by eliciting the rajas, the active principle. You have to give me more specific example. In what way?
Sometimes you go through phases of tamas, or
in the body, in the mind, in the emotions?
Maybe body and mind both, but you may not realize falling into tamas, but you fall into it. Maybe you think it's sattva, but you fall into tamas instead, and then getting out of it is hard.
Okay, so since you're not getting into specifics, I will give a general response also. I've had this issue come up many times with people who say, how can I overcome laziness, tiredness, inertia, etc. And when I went into detail, asking them what specifically, pursuing into detail, I discovered that they were not sleeping enough, they were overworking, and the result was the body would collapse at the end of the week and needed to sleep long hours, was unable to be pushed beyond limits, etc. In most cases that I had to deal with questions like that, it was just not giving body enough rest. And the result is body gives you a pushback. If that is the case with you, then you need to find out the right balance and give the body its due. Once you're able to give the body its due, you can then gradually nurture and cajole it to assist you in that further requirement that is there, and it will collaborate. But if you simply keep whipping the horse, eventually the horse drops dead or goes unconscious and you have to wait till it recovers. Something like that with the body. Is that the answer? Yeah, okay.
On the brighter side, I hear so many times now that people say, I found my soulmate, I'm living with my soulmate. Is there such a thing and where are they? I'd like to know.
Is there such a thing as soulmate? There are in some of the New Age teachings, it's a very seductive idea. There's someone out there exactly meant for you, with whom you will be the right partner across lives and things like that. It's a seductive idea, but Sri Aurobindo refers to it as a dangerous philosophy. In fact, our journey is much more complex. The nature of relationships much more fluid across lives. And if we were bound in this way, which may happen very rarely, occasionally, there would be a purpose to it. But generally for most people, it's not like that. But it's a nice feeling to say that because it makes you feel morally and somehow internally more secure when people get married to say, oh, we've always been together and we will be together for 7 lives. In India, that's the thing, 7 lives. And so in joke, I say, well, after the 7th life, you will separate for good? No. We will have 7 more lives. Okay, it's a nice thing. But it's nice to say such things when you don't feel your soul. When you actually experience the consciousness of the soul, somehow all these human relations seem almost childish. You see kindergarten children playing, I will be mama, you will be papa, and now this is our baby, he's now sick and the doctor comes. Okay, it's fun. And now tomorrow they play a different game. It's almost something like that. It's as superficial as that. To the soul's relationship, the first and primary relationship is with the divine. And the divine immanent in the universe. And everything that reveals the divine or nourishes you with the divine presence, beauty, truth. And that's soul food. And its relationships with people are based on how much that relationship nourishes this, the closeness to the divine, how much that relationship brings and assists or shares in the closeness of the divine. And somehow the social relationship, parent, friend, sister, brother, child, extremely superficial. And in the few cases where certain souls keep meeting repeatedly as part of the play, and sometimes they may not for many lives and then again meet, it may be in many different relationships. Once it is husband and wife, once it's mother and child, sometimes it may be brother and sister or just very good friends who meet for a few hours in the lifetime, feel this closeness, oh yeah, it feels like we've always been good friends, and we part and never meet again for the rest of the life. Once in a while, why not? No, there is no compulsion that you have to be with X or Y or Z at a soul level. Because in the soul's consciousness, everyone is already close to you in the oneness of the divine. It's a very different way of relating from there.
I have a question. This is a personal experience. Oh, go ahead, somebody. Oh, we are out of time?
Last question.
Okay, thank you. So this is with regards to the dream state I was in. I registered this dream. I was in saw that there's a subtle physical world where there's Sri Aurobindo and there's white pillars but no walls. And I came back from the dream state and noted it down because it felt very concrete. And then somewhere in the agenda or somewhere else, the same description was there. Mm-hmm. And then I was grateful that I was able to keep the memory of it because many a times I don't remember dreams at all. My question are twofolds. One, so there's a subtle physical world. Sri Aurobindo's created this beautiful land of love there. will it manifest on earth? Is this the purpose that He created such a concrete thing there?
Everything that happens on earth, on the physical plane, is a representation of things which already exist on other levels. And that's the reason why you can conceive of something before you can express it. In the act of conceiving, you're seeing it on the world of the mind. You feel the vividness of it when it approaches in the domain of the vital. And then it takes on a material form, and you can see you've materialized an idea. Everything in nature which you see, including plant, animal, species and forms, are physical representations of creatures, plants, animals and other forms, in the vital and mental domains. Nature only gives them a material expression. They might grow extinct and she may bring them back again, some variations here and there. But everything here is finally an attempt to replicate things which are much more perfect in their domain. The closest level, which is non-material, is what Mother calls the subtle physical. It's belonging to the domain of the subtle worlds, but is close enough to have the density of the gross physical, and therefore semi-visible or invisible to us, but tangible sometimes. And that's the level closest from which an action of the subtle worlds can be on the physical world. And that's the level where the Mother said Sri Aurobindo has taken his station to assist in this evolutionary process. And things there are much more beautiful. You have the passages in Savitri where he describes the subtle physical worlds and the perfection of the forms possible there, because matter is plastic and even translucent, conscious in itself. In the moment you shift from there to the gross physical domain, everything dulls down intensely. You shift into that world and the colors are so much richer. You come back to the gross world and there's a thinning and dulling of sensations, colors, emotions, clarity of awareness, everything dulls. And that passage is somewhat painful, but recognizing that this is there, this is what eventually must be here. That's part, must be, will be. Because the whole purpose of the manifestation is to bring here what is there, manifest, right?
So in that world, it was like fluorescent, like luminous. So
translucent and glowing from within, because it's conscious and radiating its own awareness, which is felt as light.
Is that the supramental body then?
Perhaps what you saw was that, or it was its representation in the subtle physical. I do not know. One would have to go into detail. But yes, eventually, even in nature here, the evolutionary shift will represent those forms, and that level of perfection in matter will be inevitably. So we can center upon the original theme of this series of discussions of the Mother's symbol, reminding ourselves that we are, each one of us, a symbol of the Divine Mother's action here on earth, with infinite potential, without limit. To begin to tap that, to consciously activate that, is the process of yoga. We can concentrate on this for a while.